Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. This is part 3 in the IBM 5150 Rescue series. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, I recommend you watch those first because this is definitely a continuation right where we left off. Also, don't forget to check out my second channel. I have, I think, 1 or maybe 2 videos up that are related to this machine there, so that might be interesting to you as well. As a quick recap, in part 1, I checked to make sure the computer was working. I checked out all the cards that were in it. And then in part 2, I sorted out the machine when it comes to getting the BIOS working and the computer booting properly. It was quite a struggle. Now in part 3, we're going to finally clean up the case and also check out that power supply. 2 things I've been putting off to the very end. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Okay, the original power supply from the 5170. Let's see here, let's just take a look at the labels first. So printed right here are the current output maximums and the function of each wire on all of the connectors on the power supply. And see, it says P12, P11. Looking at one of the Molex connectors for the hard drive, it says P11 on it. Right off the bat, it's really interesting to me. P10, 11, and 12 are Molex connectors, the regular 4-pin ones. Notice that P12 here has a different current rating than these other two, 2.8 and 1 amp. 2.8 amps on 12 volts, 1.8 on 5 volts for both of these. And then this one, P12, which looks exactly the same, is just 1 amp on both. So this particular power supply is the original IBM part. It is multi-voltage. Looks like it's assembled in Mexico. And then I suppose this right here are the sums of all the various voltage rails. So 20 amps on 5 volts and 7.8 on 12, etc., etc. There's a warning message. Hazardous voltages inside. Do not open. Well, sorry IBM, but I'm actually going to open it. Turning onto the side, we have the fan, mains input. We have an output. This just passes through. Goes through the power switch though. So if you are plugging your monitor into here, it would turn it on when you turn on the power switch. There is a voltage selection switch set to 115 volts. And on this side, it's just grimy and dirty, but there's a vent. And then on the side here with the chunky power switch, we actually have a date code 1986, 46th week, which is interesting because the Type 1 motherboard that's in this computer shouldn't have come from that late in the manufacturing game for this computer. So I'm wondering maybe this was a replacement power supply. And one thing that's interesting is that I know that the original IBM 5170 power supplies, if you didn't have a hard drive in the machine, you needed a big load resistor connected to one of these Molex connectors. Otherwise the power supply wouldn't run properly. Like it would over voltage and it would shut itself down from insufficient load. And I noticed when looking at the 5170, there was a spot for the load resistor. It's in that second hard drive bay on the left side. There are 2 holes there where it gets screwed in. Well, this machine obviously was working. I mean, I didn't test this power supply, but it didn't have that huge original Seagate drive. It just had that small hard card in there, which probably doesn't draw that much, and yet the power supply was working. So maybe when the hard drive died, they took it out, and it seemed like the power supply was bad, because it would no longer run the machine anymore without that big hard drive, so they put a new one in. If anyone thinks that I'm on the right track with that hypothesis, please let me know, but that's my thought at least. So let me try to zoom in here. One thing I notice is that the screws on this are Torx, but they're security bits. Lucky for me, thanks to viewer Paxton, he recently sent me this iFixIt kit here, and this will have the right bit that I need to open this power supply. In fact, here are the security bits right here. Let's see which one of these is the right one. There it is, that's the one. And it appears that every single screw on here is that type, even the ones on the fan grill. So I'm just running into one of my first issues with this kit. Totally works, it's taking that screw out, but it's in the metal, so it's really hard to unscrew. And this obviously is a precision bit driver, so I just don't have a lot of leverage on it. Definitely kind of struggling. So I'm going to grab this toolkit, which I think also has security bits in it. Yep, it does. Let's just figure out which one's the right one. And the benefit with these is I can use this larger driver here, which has a lot more leverage. In fact, I'm struggling even with that, so I'm just going to use my drill. There we go, it's coming right apart. Ooh, yeah, that's some, that's some dust. And there we are, taking a look inside the power supply. It's different than you would have thought. It's a double layer design here, where it's got two PCBs, where I'm not really sure of what the design idea was there, but obviously the primary and some of the secondary is on the top board, and this over here is obviously a whole lot of filtering. And then on the board on the bottom here, I definitely see some potentiometers down there for adjustments. In fact, if I flip this upside down here, they even have some holes here that allow you to access the 3 potentiometers that are on that bottom board. So it's interesting, the fan here has this like kind of white, weird grime on it, but it does spin all right. I think the first thing I need to do is really just take this outside with the air compressor and try to get a lot of this black dust off. It's not oily, it should come off, but it's kind of hard to see any leakage is going on the board with that on there. And I'm back from outside. Now the power supply looks a billion times better, a lot cleaner, and a lot easier to see what's going on. So I've given this thing an inspection on the inside here, and I don't see any evidence of any leaking caps. As I'm not surprised, to be honest. Really high quality power supply, really high quality caps, and that time period, caps are just really reliable. Unless they're overheated and they dry out. But I have a feeling, judging by the big fan here, this thing probably stays nice and cool during operation. The only caps I'm gonna suspect as potentially problematic are these, this one and this one right here. These are probably filter caps. Nowadays, these would be Y1 class caps, safety caps, across across the ground or earth to live or hot. And I found in some older power supplies, they go leaky, which has the effect of tripping your RCD or ground fault interrupter. It can actually be a little bit of a safety problem as well, if that's happening. And that's because if you hook up a 2-prong plug to this and you don't have it grounded, then the metal chassis of the computer becomes potentially live, or at least above the ground. So you could touch that and potentially get a shock, especially if you don't have ground fault breakers in your house. All of these circuits down here in the basement are of that type. So if there is a problem with this, it will just trip my breaker. Okay, well, I think I'd like to test this thing out. So I'm just gonna grab a few things to load it up. So I have this 5¼ inch hard drive here. And for 5-volt load, I'm gonna use this 486 motherboard here. I can definitely tell that someone has been in this machine plugging in and unplugging these power connectors, because all the little tabs are broken off that hold them on. And I'm gonna grab the multimeter here so we can just monitor, which one should be monitored, the 5-volt rail. Actually, I'll grab another multimeter so we can monitor the 12-volt rail as well. Okay, this one is 12 volts, this one is 5 volts. I have the post card hooked up, although you can't really see it. Hard drive is connected, the power supply is waiting. Oh, I need to hook a power cord up to it. I do have the power switch in the off position, I hope. Okay, there we go. And I tilted this camera right onto the power supply so you can see it in case it blows. Here we go. That was nothing. Oh, maybe I should plug it into the wall. All right, try number 2. Here we go again. Okay, so we're at 5.2. It's a little high. 11.9 is pretty good there. Let's see what happens once the hard drive stops spinning up. Okay, yeah, that's a bit high. I think I'm gonna flip this on its back, and so I can get to those potentiometers, see which one of them adjusts the 5-volt rail down. The motherboard is booting normally. Turn that off. Okay, I'm ready. I can reach these three. Let's turn this back on. And we're getting nothing. I think the power cord must have come out. Yep, it did. Let's try this again. Okay, here we go. I don't know which one is which. All right, I'm adjusting this yellow one here. It does not seem to be making any difference. There's a blue one here. Okay, now as I turn this, the 5-volt rail does come down, but so does the 12-volt rail, pretty dramatically, actually. And then the third pot, there's a bunch of gunk on it. Like, I won't be able to even adjust that. So let me just try this yellow one again. I wonder what this one is adjusting, because it's definitely not having an effect. Must be one of the other rails. All right, so the negative 5-volt rail's perfectly at -5. And the -12 is at -11.9. Interesting. So I did a quick search and I found the Sam's computer facts for this power supply. But as usual with Sam's, obviously there are multiple versions of this power supply. This one in the documentation here is not this one at all. This one only has, well, one main board and a filter board. There's the filter board. But on the main board, it has a couple IC chips there, and oh, 3 actually. And this one here, it's got no ICs, at least not on this side of the board. There might be some on the bottom. So that really doesn't help me because I was looking to find out if I could figure out the adjustments. So in light of that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn down the 12-volt rail, which will bring the 5-volt rail down. I don't like that it's over 5.2. 5.1 though, that's fine. And if 12 volts is a little low, it's no big deal. It just runs the disk drives and stuff. Okay, this is hooked up to 12-volt rail again, and my EEV blog one is on 5 volts again. Turn this on. Yeah, 5.24, too high. I think I'm going to leave it right there, 5.1 volts, 11.6 on the 12-volt rail. And to be honest, when I put this back in the 5170, it could be a little bit better looking with all that additional load. In fact, this might become a too low because I don't know how much load this 486 is actually putting on this power supply. Probably not enough. That big motherboard plus all the RAM and stuff I have in there, definitely going to put more load on this power supply than this. Now, I think one question that I'm curious about is if I unplug this hard drive, will this thing actually run without the 12-volt load? The original 5170 power supply, definitely not. In fact, -0 degrees, when I'm just looking on my phone, it said that you had to have that load resistor I mentioned. But let's see about this power supply. Worst thing is just going to turn on and turn right back off again. Look at that. It actually works fine without the hard drive. So this particular power supply, no issues. 11.7, 5.08, the regulation is actually a little bit better without all that 12-volt load. So that's kind of cool. Kind of goes back to my hypothesis that someone took the original power supply out when it was no longer running the machine without that big hard drive anymore, and they put this newer one in. They still use a genuine IBM part, but interesting. So I think the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this original fan. It runs at a very high speed. It's a little loud. So I'm going to put a little bit more modern of a fan in this machine. I'll probably keep this just, to say I have the original fan. It has a connector right here, so I can just unscrew this and unplug it, and I'll swap it over for a modern, quiet, fluid-bearing fan. I had this new fan to install, and I just noticed that it's not the same size. So clearly, that's not going to work. I think this is 200 millimeters. This fan looks like 220 or something, so a bit bigger than normal. Yeah, I'm just testing out this fan outside the power supply, and definitely works, but it's pretty noisy. And I have another fan that's the right size. Unfortunately, this is a 4-wire, so when you hook these up without the PWM signal, they just run at crazy maximum speed. Otherwise, I think this would be a relatively good fan. It's a hydraulic bearing. I think I took this out of a Dell or something, but it is the right size, but without a PWM controller, not really going to be much help. So this is the fan that came out of this power supply right here, PAPST multi-fan. And the funny thing is, I looked at my drawer and look what's here. Another one made in West Germany. I wouldn't be surprised if this one on the left came out of the 5170 power supply of the machine that has the broken front, because I did replace that one. So I think I may end up just swapping the power supplies, because it has a relatively quiet fan in it, and that power supply absolutely works. So does this one, but I'll just reinstall the original fan in it and call it a spare. All right, power supply is all back together. You know, the metal's a little dirty and I've cleaned it up, but that's just oxidation. It doesn't really come off very easily. And best of all is it actually works. So it does have the original fan though, so it'll be a little noisy for today's standards. I mean, in the old days, that was normal. You just had fan for circulation. And of course, you only had one fan. You didn't have like 5 fans like you have in a modern computer. But when you don't have a big hard drive and stuff in there, it's okay to put a smaller or a quieter fan that circulates a little bit less air. Not to mention the design of fans now are just quieter. A lot of the noise from this fan comes from the actual motor in it. It's not just the wind noise. You can hear the buzzing of the motor, and that's just, it's old. It has noisier bearings. It's just the way they were back then. Anyhow, like I said before, really good quality power supplies when they were new, and it's not surprising that this thing still works perfectly today. Oh, incidentally, I noticed while working on it, sorry I didn't get a picture of it, on the PCB it said Zenith. So I think they're the manufacturers or the designers of this power supply. Kind of cool. Well, lots of work has been going on the 5170. Something that I have ignored is the top cover. I have no idea if this thing's going to clean up well or not, so I think it's time to start tackling this. For cleaning, it's going to be the usual suspects. Windex, baking soda, and a magic eraser, and of course, a cloth. I think the first thing I need to do is separate the front from this metal part here, this plastic, so I can attack the cleaning separately on them. And to remove the front panel, you just simply take off these nuts, which are the same size as the ones that hold on the slot covers and things like that. So you need a nut driver. This was the wrong one. It's this smaller of the two sets, or drivers. It's really funny is I always had these nut drivers. I think I got them in a toolkit just 20, 30 years ago. And I never really thought about what these were for. But it really feels like these were sort of designed for IBMs, because this larger of the two is for the outside case cover screws, and the smaller one is used on all the screws on the inside. So it's just sort of funny that I've had these for so long, and yet they've really come into their own and have become useful with a machine like this. I think the biggest annoyance is these screws have been in this plastic so long, they're a little hard to get out, and of course hits the metal here. So there's just not a lot of room. A bendy screwdriver would certainly be helpful. And now this should just lift straight off. There it comes. Now you may have been noticing that the badge is missing on this computer and that it like fell off with glue or something that went bad. But that's actually not the case. If you look on the back here, there's a hole there with a little round thing. Basically, the badge on the 5170 is held on with a little spring clip mechanism, and that allows you to push it out and rotate it 90 degrees. So if you have this computer oriented like this or like this, you can have the badge with the correct orientation. It's something that like Sony did on their PlayStations, for instance. PS2, I think, was the first one that had that, and maybe the later ones, I don't know. But IBM was doing that in 1984 when this machine came out. For the front bezel, I'm just taking it directly to the sink here, because it's definitely got some black grime over the vent area there, and I think a little magic eraser and lots of water, soap and water, should get this nice and clean. So that came out amazingly well. If I just wipe this dry a little bit, this thing, I mean, it was dingy and dirty, Now it looks great. So one thing to consider is this is sort of a dark plastic or some type of a composite material that is then painted. So it does get scratches, and when you have a scratch, there's no way to clean that up. Like there's little nicks and stuff here and here. You'd need touch-up paint. Well, and a touch-up paint that's the same color as the original IBM color. So if anyone has any ideas of like a car touch-up paint, for instance, that is like this beige, white, off-white color, because it looks like over here on the badge, there's a little scratch under where the badge was. And I have a feeling someone dug a screwdriver in there to try to get that off. There's also a small scratch here, which is probably from an impact. There's a little chip right here on the bottom. There's a few little chips there. Some scratches along the edge here. There's a little mark right here that might come off with baking soda. But then right here, there's a gouge that's also a scratch on the top of the case on the metal part. So that's obviously not going to come off, not without a little touch-up paint. But overall, this front panel is in really good shape. And compared to the one I have that has a big crack in the side and a big chunk missing, this one is a lot better. All right, so the top lid. Now, I already have gone and done a quick cleaning on the inside here. There was a lot of grime and dirt in here, but since it was on the inside, it cleaned right off just with a little magic eraser and Windex, no problems there. But it's the outside that we really have issues. Now, I guess my biggest question is, I think this splotch here should come off, but is this rust right here on the corner, is that gonna come off? Oh, it's already coming off of my finger. Well, let's, you know what? I'm gonna put this cloth under here because I don't want this to drip down onto my 70s towel. And let's start spraying this with Windex. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, whatever this is, it's very caked on. I have some baking soda on here. Let's see what happens on this spot. I'm presuming what happened here is the machine was probably on its side and something dripped on it, some kind of a water, and that really did a number on the paint here. So I'm not holding out hope that this is actually going to come totally clean here. Yep, and it looks like right here the paint is actually coming off, like the powder coating, which is what this is. So this is definitely, this black part on the corner is not something that is coming off. I think the powder coating is gone, and that's just the mild steel or whatever this thing is made out of now coming through. So I guess what I need to do now is just, look, it's actually coming right off here. So the adhesion of the sort of beige paint to the metal has been weakened, because look at that, it's coming right off. It's actually kind of sad because the rest of it's in pretty good shape. My other top cover, while it doesn't have big problems like this, got a lot of little scratches and rust marks on it. And I think I did a video at some point about using this wheel cleaner to clean up a lot of the rust that was visible in the paint, and then I coated the top of the paint basically with a car product, like a wax, that sealed it so it would like slow down the rusting. But yeah, I'm gonna keep working at it, but I have a feeling it's just gonna remove this paint entirely here. Yeah, this is just getting worse here. So maybe I should try to clean this off or get it off all the way and then just slap a big Commodore sticker on there or some other sticker. Oh yeah, it's too bad. And it sucks because over in this area where the paint's not damaged, using the baking soda has really brought the color back. It's looking a lot better than it is over here, which just, it's kind of grimy looking. In fact, let me do a pass over all of this area and you'll see how much nicer it's gonna look. So now it's just nice and clean over here. There's a little scratch there, a couple nicks here and there, but otherwise this is looking a lot better in this whole area. If the rest of this case cleans up to look like this, and that's the only real blemish, that won't be such a bad thing. But now this one, of course, has this problem, which I'm gonna keep working on here until it comes off. All right, well, I've been working at this a little while. Clearly this is a bit of a mess here. The paint is, like especially in this area here, it is so bad I could just use my fingernail and it comes off very easily, which is not how it should be. It doesn't do that over in these areas over here where there's not a failure. So obviously there's a bit of rust actually under where the paint was right there. So clearly, I guess whatever dripped here I've been getting underneath the case or under the paint for a little while. So this whole area will need to be sanded down, covered with a primer and painted. And I mean, I am really not good at that stuff. You have to be patient and methodical about how you do it. And unfortunately, there's just a lot too much going on in the basement here, and I don't really have space to set up to have something go through a paint process like that. So what I'm probably going to do is I'll probably just roughly sand this down with a sanding block, this whole area here. I'll mask off the rest of this case, and then I'm just gonna hit it with some primer so at least it doesn't keep rusting. Because I think that's what I wanna prevent with this case, is any further deterioration of the metal. And then one day in the future, if someone wants to attempt to recover this, they can. So now I think we're all curious is, will the rest of this case clean up okay? So the Windex, I sprayed some Windex on here. Let's see about that area. Look at that. Came right off. It did leave a little bit of rust behind. And right here, let's see if that's, yeah, I think that's on top of the paint right there. I don't think this is actually rust. I think is actually like something on the case. Yep, it is. It came right off. So I have a feeling the rest of this case is actually going to clean up pretty well, except for the side that has the paint failure. There is a big gouge right here in the paint, which lines up with the gouge that is on the top of the case, plastic, the front bezel that is. So that's unfixable, not without some touch-up paint or repainting the entire case. All right, so the top I think is as done as it's gonna get. So there's the gouge. There's definitely a little bit of rust going on right here, and that had that drip mark there. There's also some kind of weird failure going on there. The paint is very smooth right there, so I have a feeling something got underneath it because there's little nicks and stuff there. So that probably is about to peel off as well. And the rest is pretty good. There's a few little marks and nicks up at the top here. Overall, it's pretty good though. Definitely the magic eraser plus a little bit of baking soda here and there did the trick on the top. And on this side, there's really nothing to report. There's a couple marks here, which I assume are chips in the paint. So those are probably a little rusty, but you can kind of see when I spray the Windex on there, look at what happens there. There's just a lot of grime caught in the texture of the paint. And in case you're wondering, and I think I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again, this machine was definitely a non-smoker computer. Maybe it was used in an office environment, who knows? Definitely no weird smells or cigarette smoke or anything like that on this computer. So wiping the texture gets some of that grime off, but again, this is where the magic eraser really comes into its own, and this will make all the difference at getting the majority of this grime off of here. Look at that, just one wipe. I'm not even applying that much pressure, and it comes completely clean. Look at that, amazing. What a transformation. If this machine hadn't had water dripped on it, then this case top would have been in pretty spectacular condition. And on the magic eraser, lots of grime, probably some paint oxidation coming off as well. Now, because I'm not going to work on sanding and painting this immediately, I took some WD-40 and I put it on a paper towel here. I'm just wiping this area where the metal's exposed. That way it's got a coating of WD-40, which should help it not flash rust, because this mild steel, I think, will rust relatively quickly now that I have the paint off there. Now, I also have to say that the paint on the top of the lid here is very, very dull. I think far duller than it would have been originally when this machine was new. It would have had a little bit more of a sheen than it has now. And you can really notice that now that I've cleaned it and then let it dry. As it fully dries, it's really matte textured. Now, I think that can be remedied by using some car products, car paint products, because this is paint over metal. So something that will just give this thing a little bit of a coating and bring back a little bit of a sheen would be good. I'd use one of the thin liquid types, not like a wax, because of course that'll just get caught in all the texture here. But there are no car type coatings that are a thin liquid, which I have put on some of my other computers, and it really makes a big difference. You can kind of test the effectiveness, of course, with those is if you drop a bit of water on there, once the coating is on there, it beads up. But without it, of course, you know, it's going to sheet and not bead. If anyone has any good product recommendations for something to put on a computer case, like these IBM ones, that will bring back a little bit of its luster and a little bit of the original protection that this had, please let me know. Okay, I've been putting this off long enough. Now that I know the paint failure is a real thing on this, I need to take this machine down, get the components out that I need anyways, and start mixing and matching the top cover parts to make one that's as good as possible. All right, here's the bruised and battered 5170. So the top of this case, it's not gonna be easy to see in the camera. It's definitely got some scratches on it. There's a scratch here in the paint and a bunch on the back that I think came from people stacking computers on top and just dragging them across. So there are scratches here. And on the side here, if I turn it, there was quite a lot of rust, and I guess it might be coming back a little bit, but that wheel cleaner fallout stuff, it has like this acid that eats away the rust and you get all this purple color bleeding as you spray it down. It really cleaned up a lot of it, but I am starting to maybe see a little bit coming back. So ultimately, this cover is not in great shape either. It's just the difference is it's got little tiny blemishes here and there, as opposed to the other one, which has a giant blemish on the side. This one on the side here looks pretty good. The only real blemish, oh, this machine is so heavy, I can't believe it. Lifting it up is hard. Right here, this was all bent really badly from the drop impact, which I think must have hit right here on the case. So I don't think it really damaged the bottom of the computer, but the top was a mess. So there's actually quite a bit of a gap here where it's not lined up properly. And there's a little divot there. And anyway, it was all bad, but I have on my vise kind of an anvil section, you know, and I actually took it with a mallet and I started beating it, and it worked. It's much better looking now than it was. But now you can definitely see the the missing piece here that I didn't have, so I couldn't have glued this back on. When I got this computer, that part was already missing. Now looking at the back of the case, it looks basically the same as the other one. I mean, there's a little bit of like rust residue. I think this thing was stored in an environment with a lot of moisture, hence the rust that was on the case, and it kind of got to the back a little bit as well. But let me take the screws out because this thing had serious battery leakage damage from the 386 motherboard that was in here when I got it. So I kind of recall that ate away a bunch of the inside of the case too. This might actually be the first time ever showing this 5170, my original one, on the channel before. I got this before I was doing YouTube videos. Well, maybe I was doing YouTube videos already, but it sporadically didn't really have the channel per se. And this was put together kind of haphazardly with stuff I got from eBay and places like that. So yeah, let's just take a quick look at this thing. So right off the bat, the motherboard that's in here is a 286 motherboard, but it is absolutely not the original IBM 5170 one, right? This is a 12 megahertz, if I recall, 286 with 0 wait states. And actually with the RAM chips that are on the motherboard here, this has 4 megs of RAM on the motherboard. It originally came with 640K, if I recall, when I got this. I bought it off eBay ages ago. It was the very first 286 motherboard I ever bought in recent times. This was years ago. But it was able to take 1 meg chips to bring it all the way up to 4 megs. So that's kind of cool. And the fact that it runs at 0 wait states means as far as 286s go, it's pretty fast. So right here is an SD card adapter, and this is old. You can't even get these anymore, but this is when you could buy these. And they were actually an SD card slot, IDE, and it was mounted on a card bracket, so you could just stick it in your computer. I don't know what happened. These are no longer available anymore. You could buy the adapters here, but they do not come with this nice slot bracket that has the LEDs and whatever. You can 3D print your own, but for whatever reason, these are just not available anymore. And it's a shame because I prefer to use SD cards over compact flash cards. They're just cheaper, more ubiquitous, but there you go, not really available. All right, so the next card is, I can already tell what it is, and I don't really know why I have it in here, but it's a modem. Why do I have a modem in here? Beats me. Everex Systems, modem EV940. Who knows? Maybe I was just trying to fill out the slots, like I didn't have any more slot covers, but clearly modem is useless now. And then the next card here, this is actually a Creative Sound Blaster, I guess a 1.5? People will be able to tell me the difference looking at this card. Now this card actually belonged to Dave Just Dave. He had this card brand new when he was a kid. And one of the things he accidentally did is he sent, I think it was a line input or something, he sent like speaker level inputs into it, and it blew out something on the input stage. So it no longer can digitize audio. But that's fine, because I never do that myself personally. For whatever reason, the volume knob is broken off here to adjust the volume. It still works, the pot, so I can just adjust it with a screwdriver once and leave it. I have upgraded it to Creative Music or CMS compatibility. This card, though, was already situated from the factory to just get the simple upgrade. I picked up those chips for a few dollars from China. I mean, I think I got 5 of them or something, or maybe I got 2, I don't remember, but it was very inexpensive, and this absolutely has CMS capabilities now. Down here, by the way, it says CT1320C, like Charlie. So I don't know what that means, but this is an original card, and like I said, he had this when we were kids. We were in high school, he had this card. Okay, so next card is just a Trident VGA card. Nothing particularly special here. And then we have this network card, which I think, let's see, it's either a 3Com or Intel. I bet you it's 3Com. It's an Intel card, okay. Intel, it's 10 megabit, it has an AUI jack on here. So this is a cool card. It works with packet drivers and DOS. And actually, now that I think about it, it's got the ROM on here. And you know what? This ROM, it's loaded with XT-IDE BIOS on here. So this network card itself has the XT-IDE on that ROM chip. I figured that out very early on as a way to do that. The Intel cards have a DOS utility that let you configure, this is years ago I did this, but hopefully I'm remembering correctly. You can configure how this ROM maps into memory. So you can pick the map and stuff like that. And you can tell that this is an EEPROM, right? I can't remember if the XT-IDE config utility can actually program this on the card. I don't think it can. So you have to configure the ROM separately, save the ROM file, and then program this. But this totally gives this computer, this 286 here, the XT-IDE capability. And the last card is obviously the multi-IO IDE type card, and it's a Gold Star Prime 3. So these were pretty common stuff. Jumpers, there's a thing here for like the serial port, there's a game port, etc., etc. The power supply in here is definitely an original IBM one. It does look different though than the power supply that's in the other machine. So obviously they had multiple suppliers. This does not have that big load resistor in the case, although I can see it did have one because the paint is sort of scratched away where something at some point was screwed into there. But definitely one of the giveaways that this is an IBM power supply. It says P10 on that connector, P8, P9 there, and I think the other ones off the drives also have numbers on them. If you are curious about this motherboard, it's the DFI Racer, if I recall, and very configurable with lots of RAM options. I mean, there's these chips here that aren't populated, but I think this is not to be populated when you have the 4 megabytes installed like I do. Oh, these have to be 80 nanosecond chips. I'm pretty sure these are 80s. They might be 60s actually, to support the 0 wait states. And actually, the 286 processor is right here, has a heatsink stuck on it that I put on. There's also a Mathco processor in here, and this is one of the faster ones. I think I have some faster 286 chips, like 16 megahertz, and this motherboard might be a good candidate for overclocking. I'd have to look up this chipset here, which looks like it's made by Suntac, just to see how fast it can go. And I don't see a clock I see a couple crystal oscillators here, but I don't see the 4-pin variety. So I don't know, I might have to experiment around to figure out what's the ideal speed of this, but it might be just sort of fun, as a separate video, of course. The math coprocessor is an Intel 287 XL, which I guess is the faster one. Now this also has replacement EPROMs in it, some early ones that I made, actually made a video about trying to get IDE working on this thing years ago, and it involved having to switch these out. These are the AMI BIOS, if I recall. It might be the Quad-Tel as well, I can't quite remember. Anyway, obviously the biggest problem with this motherboard in here is it doesn't have the purity that the original 5170 has at a mere 6 megahertz with the really big motherboard that goes all the way under the power supply there. Oh, you know what? This is what's missing from my case. There's a little plastic thing here and there that holds the motherboard from bouncing up and down. And this case has these here. I don't know if they even show up in the camera. There's a little white plastic thing right there. And I don't think that that's actually on the other case. And I don't even think there's a provision for that. But maybe there is. I need to try to get this off somehow. And then if they are, I'm going to stick them on the other case because they are missing. And the other motherboard bounces up and down under the power supply there. All right, one of the things I'm taking out of this case to put in the other one is the power supply. Now so because it's an original IBM part, I don't feel I'm ruining the purity by switching it out. And like, I don't think that other power supply is original anyways. So I'm okay with switching, original as in like the original IBM one that came with that computer, because again, no load resistor. So I'm okay with swapping this out. Here's that power supply. Part number 618-1000. This is that thing I was talking about here. Okay, it lifts straight out. So this is what you stick in there to hold the motherboard in place on the edge. All right, here is the very heavy and the new 5170, the one with better purity. So what's interesting is looking at this power supply, this is the one that was in the new 5170, the part numbers don't match what was in the old one here. But this old one has a date code right there, 84/52nd week, well, very end of the year, which would place it as being pretty old. But this one, I don't know if I saw a date code on here, but definitely the part numbers don't match at all. Well, just the fact that this one I just took out of the other machine is older definitely means I'm going to put it in here, not to mention it's much quieter. And I really do prefer the quiet. And now I can give an example of where the little plastic things are missing on the motherboard here. And you see how it just flops around? And these things here, if I just bend this up, I should be able to get this in place like that, holds the motherboard in. I feel much better. The motherboard holder thingies are in there. No more flopping around. All right, in with this big power supply here, the older one. And now let me populate the machine with some of the components I had meant to from the very beginning, like the sound card, which is only 8 bits, so it fits nicely in the 8-bit slot all the way on the far side. And then this Intel network card, which handily has the XT-IDE BIOS on it. Wow, the power just went out, which kind of sucks because it's 100 degrees outside and it's supposed to be 110 today. In fact, tomorrow is supposed to be the hottest temperature ever. Oh, there we go. Power came back. The temperature is supposed to be the hottest ever on record in Portland tomorrow. I think like 46 degrees Celsius, 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And I won't be happy if the air conditioning doesn't work. So far it's nice and cool. I'm glad the power came back. Oh boy. They have warned us that the electrical grid will be under immense strain because of the air conditioning that everyone's running. So I have a feeling that that may not be the first outage. Okay, so time to disassemble this case again. This is the top of the the broken one, and I'm just going to put the good front that I've cleaned up now onto this lid. Kind of make the best of both worlds. Oh, still connected. Is that because of the epoxy, I wonder? You know what? I think it is. Shoot. When I epoxied the front together, because it was broken down here in this corner, I think I got it accidentally epoxied to the front of this case. Oh no. Oh, there we go. Okay. So there's the broken corner. And both of these plastic standoffs were broken there. So I used a plastic epoxy there and also on that one. And if I recall, I think I kind of screwed it all together and then I gushed a bunch of the epoxy in there just to get the alignment right. So that's why it was stuck a little bit to the top cover. And then here, this is the back of the badge. So there's the badge. So you can push on it. So if I flip this around, so you can push this out, and there's the badge, and it allows you to rotate it. So you can have your badge at any orientation you want. I mean, suppose if you wanted to have it upside down, you could. Okay, so there was like a little metal washer that is on this plastic stake here, and then you can lift that off, the spring, and then the badge should come out. There it is. So there's the badge. So I just used some vice grips to compress the little metal thing here, and I'm gonna have to flatten it back out again so that it works when I put this on the other front. There we go, that should do the trick. So now, badgeless. It's definitely kind of rude, whoever just pried that off, obviously snapped this back part right off of the computer. So that's kind of cruddy, but whatever. Luckily I have a spare, right? So we just put that on there, and I'm gonna get this over here. I just wanna have it on there enough so it doesn't come off. I think that's good right there, like that. Cool, okay. Badge transferred, no more crack. The lid without the paint failure on the side. Just get this aligned. And we're gonna do the old Fran Blanche method, going backwards until you hear a tick, because this is in the plastic here, and this plastic is surely old and brittle. There is the tick, and then you thread it in so you're not creating a new set of threads. And of course, do not over tighten, because this plastic front is almost certainly kind of brittle and not super strong. And there we have it. We have one front cover that looks good without a big hole in the side, and a computer lid that's kind of a rough shape, but a lot better than the other one. All right, the finish line is getting close. So let's see how this fits, because this top, like I said, was all dented up, so it may not align quite right. But let's see what happens. There we go. Oh yeah, that's on there. And that, I gotta say, looks really, really good. Yes, I am very pleased with how this machine is coming together. Well, there you have it. The IBM 5170 series is done. The rescue mission is complete. I want to thank, of course, patron Justin for saving this machine in the first place and bringing it to me. I'm really quite glad to have a nice, complete machine now. When I combined both the parts from my old dropped one and this one, I have a nice, good quality machine that's working well. I've been using it here with the IBM CGA monitor plugged into the ATI VGA Wonder card, so it's running in EGA mode on a CGA screen. It's not perfect, of course, because EGA would be a better monitor to have with this thing, but I don't have one of those. It's not that big a deal though, because this thing will go back behind me on that keyboard drawer and be plugged into a KVM, and I'll use it with a VGA monitor anyways, because I need to be able to switch between this machine and the machines I have under here, which are faster, newer machines. Having played around with this thing and played some games and applications and whatnot on it, 6 megahertz 286, it's pretty slow. I could see that if you were upgrading from an old 5150 or 5160, which is an XT, there's a substantial speed increase. But compared to even slightly later 286s, like the 12 megahertz one I had in that machine with the broken front, that machine was easily 2 or more than 2 times faster than this machine. That means that when I boot up some games that work fine on a 12 megahertz 286, they don't quite work so well on a 6 megahertz one. It's just at the edge of playable. But I like having this 6 megahertz machine because in 1984, this was the fastest you could get. And that's kind of cool. There's actually a little bit more work I'd like to do on this machine, and I'm not quite sure if I should make another video on it because I think maybe people are sick of seeing me work on this machine. But all the problems I went through in part 2 with the BIOS on this machine and having to resort to using the quad-tail BIOS, I actually have a solution for going back to the original IBM BIOS, and then I can also use that original floppy controller card as well. So if you'd like to know my solution for that, please let me know down in the comment section below. Put a comment down there about that. Anyways, that is going to be it for this series, I think, for now at least. So if you enjoyed it, I'd definitely appreciate a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do, all that YouTube-y stuff. Hit subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. And check out my second channel if you haven't already. In fact, I've already put up some videos on the second channel about this machine, like an autopsy on that Hardcard that was found in here. And I also have one coming up about the EGA card that was in here as well. Thanks to all my patrons. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen right now. If you want to become a patron, you can check the description below. There's a link. And I think I've talked long enough on this. So that is going to be it. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.